To review the status of the city's ARPA spending. I'm Councilor Green. I'm joined by Councilor Schultz. So Jen, I'll turn it over to you to kind of give us an overview of where we are.
Sure. Thank you, Councilor. I'm Jen Tift. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives for the city. And I just prepared a one-page, I call it a placemat since it's kind of the size of a placemat. Feel free to bring it home and eat on it if you'd like. But have your kids draw on it. You know, it's one of those kinds of interactive things. But I feel like this is a pretty good summary kind of point in time. So all of the data is actually as of Monday. We updated it to include the most recent approvals that you all made on Monday. So it's pretty current. I think the biggest highlight to kind of start with is that, you know, thank you to council. We've worked along with you to authorize 109 million out of the 123. So that's 89% of the funding, which is great. And of course, that's a not to exceed amount. So, some of the projects might come in a little less than that. Others are going to, hopefully not exceed it, but be pretty accurate. So we're pretty confident that we're doing a great job getting projects planned with the money, and getting, approvals in place so that we can really start committing and spending the money. One of the things I'll kind of point out, which is why we emphasize a little bit the obligations or the commitments of funds is, I think as you all know, the federal government really tracks closely both commitments and spend. And so the first deadline we really have to meet by the federal government is December of 2024, which is the date by which we have to obligate all the funding. We actually have 2 more years to spend all the funding. So that's why, we're really tracking to both, not just how much we're spending right now, but also how much we're obligating. And we're feeling really confident that we are going to meet those marks. As of, again, earlier this week, we've actually obligated $64 million of that 123, which is 52%. And so, of course, I think we're tracking really well to that December 2024 deadline, since we still have essentially 2.5 years. Also, as of Monday, we've actually spent $34 million, which is about 28% of the total. Again, tracking, I think, really well to that 2026 deadline, having already spent more than a quarter of the funds. So those are sort of the highest level, kind of by the numbers. Welcome, Councilor Driscoll. A couple of other things just to highlight, again, at the highest level, and then we'll get into some of the specifics for you all. So we've been meeting all of our federal reporting deadlines, and I will say, the federal reporting for this program is incredibly intense, and I give a huge thank you to Janet Burke, who's here, and her staff, who really do the bulk of the work. The federal government created a special portal, online portal, to report the data. That we have to report pretty granular details about many of our projects, and we have to do that on a quarterly basis, and then we're fully expecting, some of our programs might get audited. We may have to give them even additional information. So we've put in place a very rigorous project management and oversight process, which I help to oversee, and several of the folks from the administration here essentially meet with all of the departments that manage ARPA projects monthly or quarterly, depending on the project and the nature of the work that they're doing with this money. Really to get a lot of details from them, a lot more than we would otherwise get for a typical capital project, for example, or a typical departmental project, because of the nature of the federal reporting required. So we've really been putting that in place since we got started, and that continues. And as of today, and we can go through project by project, which is on the back of the page, but we actually have 51 projects kind of actively ongoing, 2 of which have actually been completed. So I guess there's 49 projects actively ongoing at the moment. But that's just a lot of additional work on top of what the departments already do as part of their day-to-day operations. I'll say something real quick about the revenue loss in particular, because I know there's probably questions about that, and obviously ARPA, sort of assumes that every municipality has lost revenue due to the pandemic. We've been doing the calculation, and the federal government gives us sort of a calculus to use to come up with our amount of revenue lost. As of today, and this is for fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21, we've verified 2 years of revenue loss from the pandemic. That's about $49 million. We're actually projecting, and of course we won't be able to verify the numbers until this fiscal year and next fiscal year close, but we're actually projecting an additional $93 million in lost revenue. So if you do the math, essentially we believe all of our $123 million allocation might be in that, municipal revenue loss category, which I'm pretty sure most cities won't be able to necessarily say that. That gives us...
Sorry, Jen, can you explain that a little further for me? I'm not...
Yeah, so the federal government gives us basically a calculus by which to calculate how much revenue we've lost due to the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And so Brad O'Connor and his team actually do the calculations for us. And so, what's interesting, I think, because of how we get our, revenue sources, especially being a lot of state aid and that sort of thing, as opposed to property tax and those other sources, we are one of the cities that was the hardest hit. I think there was that New York Times article, right, sometime in the first 6 months of the pandemic that showed, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo at the top of the nationwide list of cities with the biggest hit. And so these numbers essentially bear that out pretty dramatically. A part of the federal government calculus is actually an assumed rate of revenue growth year over year. So the federal government, and this is nationwide, so every city gets to use the same assumed rate of revenue growth, which is 5.7% year over year, which is generally higher than what we would typically see year over year for the city of Syracuse. So because they're giving, what is for us a very generous allowance for revenue growth, we actually, when we do the calculations based on that assumed rate of growth, we actually see that, we've lost quite a bit of revenue based on the federal calculus, and we continue to expect to, to show that loss, and we get to calculate it out over 4 years. So as of now, we're kind of halfway through that process, but I think the big takeaway from our perspective is the more of the $123 million that fits into the revenue loss equation, it basically gives us much more flexibility on how to spend that money. So for example, if we can say that a project is justified because of the city's lost revenue, we don't necessarily need to only invest in qualified census tracts. We could invest anywhere, for example. It's really those types of trade-offs which I think just give us a lot of added flexibility in terms of how we use the money. So we're really closely tracking that, and projects that we initially thought, well, maybe we would be able to do this under that response to negative health and economic impacts category. If we can, put some of those projects against our revenue loss bucket, if you will, we can actually do a lot more things with that money. And also importantly, that pot of money has far fewer reporting requirements back to the federal government. So we actually don't need to do quite as much documentation at the end of the day. Of course, we can't classify every project that way now, because as of today, we've only verified $49 million in lost revenue. So we're constantly kind of tracking to see, based on how many projects we've authorized and how much money we're spending, kind of where we're falling. It's a little bit of a timing game. But ultimately, it's better for us to have, a bigger slice of the 123 in that revenue loss.
So to clarify, so
category.
that projection of 90-something million is based on the federal guidelines of expecting a 5.7% growth
Exactly.
year after year. So
Yep.
I guess my concern is, cities' regular budgeting, we're not actually looking at we're looking at that loss number in relation to the expected growth rather than actual.
The federal government's expected growth for all cities,
Right.
not based on our
So
budget.
that's a separate category than our annual budget.
Oh, yeah.
And the stuff. Okay.
Exactly.
Got you. Okay.
Yeah. So when Brad's team, does the projected calculations, they use pretty, I think, conservative estimates for what we know our real growth to be. So I think it's a very separate process, but it's important for this reporting process in particular that we kind of know where we stand based on the.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, it's okay.
Off track there, just.
But the simplest point from that would just be that the projected revenue loss is greater than our total ARPA allocation. So in theory,
Right.
if it goes as we think, then all of it gets into this easier reporting classification.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And we're obviously going to work pretty closely. The fiscal year ends next month. It'll obviously take us a few months to close as normally. So we're hoping to do a more accurate real projection for the fiscal year 22 loss, maybe in the fall, and then we'll have a better sense of, is it really going to be 38 million, or is it somewhere, is it less, is it more? Like, as of right now, our best estimate is, we might fall around 30 some $million in lost revenue for this current fiscal year that we're still in. But we'll know in several months, I think, where we stand. So, we don't have to go through all of the program highlights. I wanted to pick out, a handful in each of our 4 funding priorities to really show the results of what we've been spending to date. I think there's some really great highlights, honestly, in all 4 areas. And the numbers here, 32 million for supporting children, families, and neighborhoods, 12 million for investing in jobs and economic recovery, 21 million for transforming infrastructure and public spaces, and 44 million to enhance our government response and resilience. Those are the amounts authorized by council for, spending in those categories. And then obviously the results are the things we've just been able to accomplish to date, even though there's several more activities that are ongoing. I think a couple of key highlights from my perspective, we've seen just actually last summer, almost 800 kids get job experience, including stipends as a part of the Summer Youth Employment Program. We're obviously expecting to see hopefully more kids than that this coming summer as a part of that same funded program. We've had, again, just related to the ARPA funding, more than 500 kids engaged in the Police Athletic League. That's, in addition to other programmatic work that the police department is doing for PAL. This is really just related to the ARPA funds that you all authorized for PAL. We've had, 64 properties demoed with the land bank, which is awesome. That's creating property that we can then turn around for infill development and things like that. And almost 20 new home buyers. That's, and that's really just since November, because that's, I think, when we got our contracts in place with home headquarters. One of the great things, I think, from an economic perspective, and this is current as of last night, which Councilor Green knows because he was at our SEDCO board meeting, we've now awarded, more than $1.6 million in loans to small businesses. That's 74 small businesses that we've been able to help through that program. Which is amazing. And you guys, I think, authorized $4 million for that program. So, we haven't even gone through half of that funding yet. We're hoping to obviously be able to support, a whole lot more small businesses as well. So, happy to talk through some of these other points. Really wanted to kind of give you all a snapshot across the entire program of kind of where things stand. So, before we get into, and then, on kind of the backside of the placemat, we really wanted to show you all, at a project by project level, kind of where things stand. So again, we don't have to go through every single project, but wanted to give you a sense of, again, kind of what we've approved, how much has been authorized, how much has actually been obligated, again, as of, actually, I think the obligation number is as of last Friday. And then, what rough percent complete the project is at. And this is, we actually have to report this information to the federal government, the percent complete. So we kind of look at it as, not started, less than 50% complete, more than 50% complete, or fully complete. That's how the federal government asks us to track it. So we could obviously get a lot more granular than that, but that's kind of the rationale for that. And then, wanted to show you all sort of the timeline expected for these projects. So every single, project that we initiate with ARPA funding, it has a different timeline associated. You guys generally see some of that when you approve projects. A lot of times you approve a contract for 1 year, 2 years, or however long. I think it's helpful to kind of see it as an integrated schedule, so we kind of all know, because I think sometimes we think, well, we approved, $90 million. So how quickly are we going to spend that $90 million? This kind of gives you a sense across the entire portfolio. In many cases, it's going to take us 2 years, 3 years. For some of our larger programs, like the new housing infill program that you all just approved on Monday for $11 million, we intend to take the next 5 fiscal years to fully spend that money, which we're allowed to do under the rules. So I just wanted to give everyone kind of that snapshot of, just because we authorize this stuff, it is intended to in some cases take 2 or 3 fiscal years on average for us to actually fully execute the program and fully spend the money. And other projects are obviously much quicker than that. And we spend the money much sooner. So happy to answer any questions at all. I know I gave you all a ton of information here, but I'd rather answer questions than drone on and on about this stuff. But I could talk for days on this.
Sorry. Council?
I guess my first one, you just mentioned, we obviously just approved 15 million yesterday. Is that included in these numbers?
It is, yeah. So all the numbers are updated as of Monday's authorization.
Okay. Sorry if I missed that.
Yep, no, it's okay.
That's a simple technical one. You have anything, Counselor?
I have a quick question. You had mentioned that you have meetings monthly and quarterly with departments. So is that how you're coordinating all of this?
Yeah, it is. And essentially that's how we get all of this information. So we basically meet with, each of these is obviously managed by a different city department. And we meet with those departments. And in many cases where we have subrecipients, we meet with the subrecipient agency. So in the case of the home headquarters projects, we have meetings with home headquarters, and so on and so forth. So we're keeping, tight oversight of our subrecipients. Our research department obviously helps us a lot with that, as well as the departments themselves. Many of our capital projects here are obviously just managed directly by, DPW or Parks or the Water Department. And so again, we're kind of meeting with those teams on a pretty regular basis. We're getting details from them on, how the projects are going. Are they running into roadblocks? Are there risks? But then all the data we have to report to the federal government in terms of, completion status and the rate of spend and the rate of commitments, we get all of that updated from them. So if there is going to be a delay, for example, and with some of our projects, right, they've been experiencing issues with the supply chain shortage in the country, right? So a lot of our police camera projects, for example, both the cops cameras and the body cams, like the delivery of that equipment was actually delayed by several months just due to the supply chain stuff. So when we meet with them, they pretty much tell us, like, we're going to be delayed by 4 months or 6 months, whatever it is, to get certain equipment. Thankfully, I don't think we've seen that that level of impact for some of our other projects, but we've seen some other delays. The fire tower construction, for example, I think there are expected delays with the delivery of some of those materials. Same thing with the water construction projects. So, we try to really stay on top of some of that stuff so that we understand how it could potentially impact our ability to commit the funds timely, since that's so important for the federal government here. So yeah, it's a lot of work, honestly, to meet with, 50 different project teams. I think we've got 17 different departments engaged in this. So we've tried to dedicate, a pretty significant amount of administrative support, to be able to do that. But to manage $123 million, it actually does really take quite a bit of both administrative oversight as well as just project management. And I think that's, that's really key. And we do, I think we have a request, and Tim can talk to you all a little bit more about that. We do have a request that we want to make to authorize some additional funding, which we didn't effectively, I think, predict or calculate when we first started this ARPA program, 11 months ago, related to both admin costs as well as other direct program costs. So generally speaking, when most of these projects, kind of got planned, and when preliminary budgets were put together, which is what the initial authorizations were based on, a lot of those departments didn't factor in their staff time to manage those projects. So it was sort of just assumed that the departmental budgets would absorb the staff time needed. So moving forward, really over the last probably 3 or 4 weeks, we've been asking everyone to kind of bake in those project costs into their project budgets, which is, really how we should be budgeting for project work, regardless of source. And this is, I think, a challenge that we generally have as a city for project management. But retrospectively going back, we hadn't really been rigorously doing that. And so we want to be mindful of, I think, being able to both account for those costs. And the federal government does give us the ability to allocate up to 10% of our ARPA budget for administration. And so we want to, have, I think, the ability to spend down this money, also to include some of those departmental costs.
So with each one of the allocations is an admin fee of some sort built into it. So you're saying that the departmental budget cost wasn't considered. So
Right.
Where is that project budget that you mentioned? Is that the city budget, or are you talking about ARPA money that we need to tap into and better allocate for this? Like,
So-
I'm imagining Janet's department is pretty underwater at this point, trying to do both of their jobs. So.
Indeed, yeah, exactly. So, so it's more the latter. So again, most of these project budgets, with a couple of exceptions, I will say there's like a handful of these projects that were, really thoroughly budgeted to include staff costs.
Mm-hmm.
But for the vast majority of them, as we've gone and we've analyzed everything over the last few months, in particular, we noticed, those budgets really included, for most part, like material costs, contract costs. So if they knew they had to, put out an RFP or do bidding for construction work, that kind of thing, obviously all of those labor costs are included. But city staff labor generally was not factored in when these projects were initially planned, both from a project management perspective, which the federal government considers a direct project cost, not an admin cost, but for admin as well. And in many cases, we did plan for specific admin positions on the research, side, for example, and in some other of our administrative departments as well, to support ARPA. We just never got authorization from you all to spend that money from an administrative perspective. So that's where I think these requests that we'd like to put forward come from. And again, I think, we've done an estimate. We've done it over the next, 4 fiscal years. So I think we're projecting up to $4 million in admin costs and up to $8 million in other direct costs. Again, that's over a 4-year period. So it's not just for this first year, this next year even. And again, it's a not to exceed amount. So we're going to be monitoring it, again, using kind of the project management meetings that we have and data collection that we have to come up with, the actual numbers. But we've tried to be as, I think, conservative as possible to acknowledge that, we don't want to get to like, the 20-yard line or the 10-yard line on a project and then realize like, oh shoot, like we missed, a personnel related cost, for example, and now we can't finish it, or we have to include it in the general fund budget or something like that. I don't know, Tim, do you want to?
Well, just to be really explicit, so there's going to be 2 letters. The one is for 4.4 million, which is the admin portion. So that's when Jen says 10% could be admin. So this is much lower than 10%, right? So it's 4.4 million out of 123 million. And then we're saying 8.1 million of direct city costs. So it's not we're administering it, it's the budget people or the research people, but it's the actual, I don't know, a DPW person who's doing something like related to the project. It's a direct cost to whatever is happening. So we want the ability to charge for that. So together they add up to 12.5 million. And to be frank, the letters are not gonna have tons of detail. It's kind of like asking for 11 million toward housing. It's not exact everything, but this is gonna be broad, but it gives us the ability to charge as things go. And it's something we didn't think about a lot at the beginning, making a plan. And then people are often kind of conservative in their cost estimates early on, or the level of effort early on in order to get a project started. But we do, and this is the type of thing that will make it so the authorization from the council will be more than 123 million. I mean, not a lot more, but we do, in order to guarantee that we spend all the money, we're going to ask for authorization to spend a little more, and then we will only spend that money, which happens in the capital plan. The authorization to bond that is outstanding is way greater than what we're actually ever going to borrow for. So it allows for some degree of flexibility. So I would just love you to have the opportunities, to the extent you're concerned about the vagueness of $12.5 million for those types of purposes, this would be a great time just to talk about it.
Is that ARPA money that you're requesting it from, or is it?
Yep, it's ARPA money, so it would be able to pay.
123.
Say again.
If we're going over the 123 allocation, then we're dipping into the city.
We're not saying we're going over, we're saying we need the authority so that we can charge as appropriate. Because if you don't give us the authority, then we can't charge. So like one example that we talked about internally yesterday is the SUNY EOC money, and whether that happens or not. Like if it didn't happen, then all of a sudden we need to do something to charge it, right? So we want a little bit of like flexibility to be able to charge. So the worst thing we could do is leave money on the table and not spend it. So I don't think the concern is that we're over promising. There may be some management at the very end to tie things up where things transition off of our bond to something else, or maybe even a bad situation depending on the overall financial picture. Maybe some things that were last to spend don't happen the whole way or something to that effect. But I think we need that flexibility to be able to manage it in the time being, and we want to be able to use ARPA funds to pay for certain things that are city direct support or just general admin.
So is the 12 million in this 90 million budgeted circle?
No.
It's not.
No, so that would
It's
be
not, because it
coming.
hasn't been authorized yet. Obviously, we have not budgeted for it.
So like the 109 total of projects that's on the back, right, that back page, and then there's like another list of another, 13, 14, 15 million of projects that we
Right.
kind of think are coming through the pipeline to you all. And then this 12 and a half is really on top of that. So we're probably 10, 15% over total authorization, which I think the whole finance team feels comfortable with. And we know we're not going to spend all of it, but we need the flexibility in order to guarantee we spend all of it. And obviously, I can speak that almost all the projects that are on the back of that list and the 13 million, 14 million that are not on there all have advocates. So the last thing they want is for their project to go away. So I would say there's going to be far more pressure to spend less on the city direct support and less on the city admin, because it's essentially taking from other projects, and there's nobody who wants to happen more than the internal stakeholders who are doing it. So I don't think there's a sense of like, oh, we're going to be willy-nilly about spending this, but it is a strategic decision that we think this is the right approach.
So Councilor Peniagua is one of the thousands of people watching at home, and she has a couple questions. So one of them was, if a project does fall through, like what's going to be our process for notification and deciding how those funds get reallocated?
Yeah, so I think, like with all the projects that we've put forward to get authorization for, if a project can no longer move forward, and we've actually had one of these instances happen already. So I think Councilor Green and Councilor Driscoll will probably remember, and Councilor Schultz, you weren't on the council yet, but early on, we got approval for 5 water projects. One of those water projects, the water department decided they actually, after we authorized it, they decided they actually didn't, want to use ARPA money in particular because of all of the engineering work going on West Genesee Street this year. They wanted to take advantage with Dig Once to do water work along West Genesee instead, and it had to be done this summer. And so they wanted to basically use those ARPA funds for the West Genesee project. So, we actually, in that case, I think deauthorized the funding for the the previous water project, and then you all, authorized the West Genesee project when the water department presented that to you. So, like with anything we want to spend ARPA money on, if, a priority shifts or we end up not spending as much, because someone thought we would spend, we'd need $11 million on housing. And I know we're going to spend $11 million on housing, but just using that as an example, right? If it turns out we only need $10 million for the infill project, right? Like, we would identify another, project priority for that $1 million we didn't spend on housing, and we'd bring that to council and you all would have to authorize it. So we're always going to have to go back to you to get authorization to spend this money on, anything new we want to spend it on. And as Councilor Rudd, indicated, we actually do have in the plan we originally published last June, actually not that many things left on it, but about a dozen things left, that we wanted to accomplish with the ARPA funding that we haven't yet brought to council to get authorized. Broadband is one example. I know Councilor Driscoll, you and I have had lots of conversations about that. And then there's a handful of other things. So we will continue to come to council to seek authorization. We'll obviously try to do these updates with you all, as often as you'd like, so that you kind of know, we're 11 months in now, but 18 months in, where do we stand with, spending the money for each project? Are projects running into issues, or are some projects maybe coming in less than what we initially expected or more? Because that has impacts obviously on what we can all do. So I think, we're going to try to be as transparent with you all as we possibly can about the status of all of this, as we are here. Hopefully folks, all appreciate that, but it takes a lot of active management to stay on top of it. But certainly anything new we'd want authorization for, we would, engage council and seek that authorization from you all.
One additional point on the 12.5 worth of the 8 whatever direct support and the 4 admin, those are costs that are going to happen regardless. So it's based on, like Joe Gorsuch basically did a whole bunch of stuff with the different partners to see how much time is being invested. So we're doing that. That's like it's either an in-kind cost that we're sort of contributing informally, or it's something that we say, hey, we explicitly did this, we'd like to claim it. So I do think that point is important to keep in mind. So this just gives us the opportunity to claim those costs, which we may or may not want to do like this, but we want the flexibility when we really feel like we need to be able to do that.
And you'd have to account for that in each individual report, department, project
Right.
that you're working with.
And that's where, for example, I think we all believe the reporting requirements for the admin charge would be less because you're entitled to this like 10% charge up front, whereas the level of detail that we would need to submit for the direct support would probably be different. So it may be okay to say 10% of my time over the course of the year is ARPA admin. It may not, whereas if I were going to go help plant trees for the Parks Department for 6 months, like I would need a tracker on my timesheet that said those hours were spent on the ARPA plantings. Or, we would need to make sure we had the right things. So the level of effort may also be different. And that's where I suspect we may do more of the admin charging and less of the direct support, but we really just think this is the best approach at the moment.
Councilor Peniagua's second question was about the reporting compliance. So just like physically what happens? So we get reports saying this is approved. How does that work?
So the federal government generally, I describe their role, at least right now, as being more passive. So they've obviously put out the regulations, which, as you all know, go through 500 pages of detail on what we have to do. And then they've provided this portal, which, as I said, is, and Janet can attest, pretty onerous in terms of, tons of fields that we have to fill out. So they've basically prescribed the types of details they're looking for. And we have to report it by project. We have to also report it by vendor or subrecipient that receives payment. So they want to see the data in a couple of different ways. And so we have to be able to like slice it up in different ways. And so essentially, we go into that portal every quarter and fill out, all of the fields, and then submit it to them. They lock down the portal, for a period of time where, they say their staff and treasury, and I'm sure they have a lot of consultants working for them, review that data, and then if they have follow-up questions, they'll obviously follow up with us. We have not been asked for additional information, as of yet. But there's always, I think, that possibility. And they've been, Treasury's been pretty upfront with, I think, all of the recipients that they will start auditing pretty extensively. And I think we saw with CARES when they, when the Congress approved CARES money, which of course Syracuse was not eligible for, but it took about 18 months before they really seemingly started to, approach municipalities that received that money with more in-depth program-related questions or potential, specific audits of specific spending. We're about a year in, so I think, by the end of this calendar year or by this time next year, it'll be interesting to see if we're getting more, feedback from them in terms of what we're reporting. But right now, we've just been pushing information at them. They've been presumably reviewing it, but we haven't gotten additional follow-ups from them.
You have anything else? I'm just going to go full wild card here. Corey,
Excellent.
Can you come up for a second? So, this is a bit off topic, but so one of the things I've talked to other counselors about in the past, and it's kind of a transportation related thing, is connecting the Creek Walk along the near west side to Tip Hill along the railroad there. And I feel like that's a really ambitious project that is really hard to do. And if we were ever going to do it in our lifetimes, this would have to be the time to do it. And I think it serves, other than just quality of life, it serves a strategic purpose from, the near west side. A lot of residents don't have cars compared to the rest of the city. And then Tip Hill is a neighborhood that has parking issues a lot. And so if people could ride their bikes or scooters, it would have a pretty big impact on job opportunities and everything else in those neighborhoods. And that would be a longer project, but is there any chance we could just get like a rough, is it $1 million? Is it $20 million? Is it something that we could think about?
Yeah, I think we could, between Neil and our engineering folks, at least get a cost estimate of what we're looking for, and then kind of, even if, as a first step, if we have the ability to do, what do we estimate the design cost would be? Because then obviously once you have the design, then it's a lot easier to shop. Obviously, if we fund it ourselves, but also if we want to shop member items or to our federal state partners, it's easier to say, we already have the design done, we just need the construction funding. So yeah, I'd be happy to follow up on that.
Because I do think I see the logic in spending it on administrative costs and stuff like that, but there is something different about going to residents and being like, here's a thing that physically transforms your neighborhood and will impact your life on a day-to-day basis in a way that like DPW's 20% of salary, you know what I mean? It's harder to show the transformation. So that'd be awesome.
Absolutely. I will. Thank you.
Do we have other questions?
All right.
Okay.
Baby, spend.
I appreciate this is very organized. So
Commissioner Rea, go ahead.
Come on, step up. We want to hear what you have to say. Director, Counselor.
But because I guess I'm probably the person that most goes, ugh, when people are like more ARPA money. So there is essentially all 123 million is going to that type of project. So this is really on top of. So I would say the admin and the direct cost thing provides some flexibility for us to just charge and to spend the money. Whereas if we wanted to do that, I would be more like we have to figure out which projects we're taking it from, because then it really is like we're over committed in a way that is harder to balance. So I just always try to make that point, because people do still make requests, and that would be a long-term thing that personally I would think sounds awesome. And maybe we can do it in 10 different ways with federal money, but in terms of the ARPA money, it gets harder. And the thing that Jen's reverse side shows is that many of these things take time to come into reality, which is why we haven't spent all the money yet. So even then, that type of project might fall beyond more of the scope, because it would require the years of prep and planning and all of that.
It may very well end up not being something we use with ARPA money, but
Yeah.
the presence of ARPA money gives us the fiscal ability to do this in a way that we probably won't ever have again, so.
Yeah, and I think, interestingly, there's other state sources for, potentially for projects like that. As Corey said, potential member items. I do think we could look at the ability to maybe use a smaller amount of ARPA as, match or leverage where it would be needed. Of course, we need to figure out like
Maybe the design money that's used to then.
yeah. So there is some flexibility, I think, still here, notwithstanding, I totally agree with Tim. It would be good to have a little bit of flexibility on top of the, basically $123 million in planned project expenses for some of the personnel stuff that we just didn't take into account before. Because certainly, as Tim mentioned, that level of admin support's already happening. Obviously the level of direct project support is already happening to make all of this happen. It's just coming out of the general fund. It's coming out of the city operating budget. So this gives us the ability to kind of make the call, like maybe we charge ARPA if we're not gonna, if we get down to the wire, it's, and I think it's way too early to say right now, honestly, but this time next year or, maybe 18 months from now, we're going to be a lot closer to that December 2024 date. We'll be like a year out from it. And then I think we'll have to make the call, if we're really potentially at risk of not being able to commit the full 123, having a set of things that we can then charge against helps us close that gap really quickly, which I think is what we're trying to do. We're trying to just make sure we're in the position, again, it's not really a huge risk from my perspective at the moment, but 18 months from now, I think that's when we have to make the hard choices about, in that last year of, basically calendar year 2024, we want to be in a position to, report to the federal government that full 123 is committed so that they don't take it back from us. I mean, I think that's the thing we're all trying to avoid is them pulling any of it back.
Is this graphic online somewhere if people want to?
It's not, but I will send it to all the counselors.
Okay, thanks. Okay,
Sure.
anything else? All right, thank
That's
you very
it.
much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
So, nice one.